Kia ora koutou, welcome. You're here in the right place. You can see my screen. Can you give me a wave if you can see my screen here saying Design for Online? Fantastic, thank you. So this session is the third session. Next session, Design for Online, Connecting with Learners in Real Time. And I invite you to unmute yourselves and join me in our opening karakia. So, tuia ki ronga, tuia ki raro, tuia ki roto, tuia ki waho, ka rongo te pō, ka rango te ao, homie, huie, tai ki e. So, tēnā tātou katoa, ko Lucy Lindsay, aho. And I invite you to share in the chat your name, where you're calling in from, and if you've got any particular focus or interest that you bring to this session. In this session just now, what we're going to do is it's got three main aims. We're talking about planning and preparing to talk online, teach online, slip there, in real time, and strategies to engage and interact. Thank you everybody adding into the chat, that's great. And then after that we'll have a sandpit session where we're going to have a chance to interact and you'll have a bit of choice as to what things we do there. So this session is going to apply to Zoom, which is what we're using here at VLN Primary. I'm the e-learning lead here at VLN Primary and we're using Zoom every day, and I'll reference some of the tools we're using, but I'm also going to try to talk about the principles in the hope that you can apply them to whatever particular tools you're using in your setting. So these Zoom ideas, some of them can be applied to other things like Meet or Hangout or Teams, whatever you're using. So I'm going to go through 10 different steps for doing this. The very first step is plan to introduce your tools. So with your learners, you want to practice. You want to, right when they first start using it, get them to practice using the audio, the video, and the chat here like we just used in Zoom, and the settings. And my big hint to you would be check out your own site settings. There are things that you can change. So you want to be deciding if your learners, for example, in Zoom, do you want to have them on speaker view or gallery view? If you're not familiar with Zoom, that's the little boxes on the top right above the people, and you can change how you see all the other people in the session. I always say to my learners, whatever's most useful for your learning. So practice, number one hint. Number two, you want to plan inclusive learning tasks. So the question I kind of ask is, what other ways can I support this learning? So I'm thinking of multiple modes here. Like I might have an image, but also a chance to talk about it, or some text or a video, or maybe students can make something. So you're thinking lots of different avenues for them to get those ideas. And thinking about how you can differentiate the tasks, because you want all of your learners obviously to have a chance to progress and succeed. And if you want more information about this, I really recommend the UDL, Universal Design for Learning stuff. It's in TKI, and I've put a link here to this, which you can access for the presentation. I put right at the very start of this, I had a link for this presentation, which you can access, and I will show that again at the end. One of my peers here might be able to pop that into the chat if they go back through. Otherwise, I can do this. So here, at the very start, I had this presentation is at this short URL. So I'll put this into the chat right now for people, and that gives you another way to access this material that I'm saying as I'm doing this. So back presenting here, welcome if you've just joined us. There's just been a link in the chat of the presentation so you can see what we've been doing. And a hint here would be, you want kind of to give your learners a bit of agency. You want to give them some choices, give them options for what they're doing. Hint number three, step number three, planning. How are you and your learners going to ask questions? So plan different ways you can do that ahead of time. With online learning, you want to be just a bit more structured than in the classroom sometimes. And if you set up some of these things ahead of time, it is well worth it. So it might be in the audio or the chat or visual ways. You might set up some Google Forms ahead of time. And you might want to think about what ways could your students collaborate, whether you're going to plan some shared docs. You might plan for a Zoom breakout session. You might have a Padlet, which is one of those really basic sort of post-it note tools that's got a wealth of uses. Brainstorm questions, mind maps, sharing tips. And in that spirit, I've got here a Padlet for you. So this link here will take you to this Padlet in spring colours. I'm going to ask one of my peers to put that into the chat for us, or else I can do that quickly. So often for students, I will put things into the chat to save them having to go through and type it. And I think that is it, LW3. Thank you very much. And you can see, thank you, Rachel, has put the Padlet there into the chat. And this is where you can add if you've got any particular questions that you would like this session to address. Another thing to plan for is feedback. Think about ways that you could gather formative feedback. So this might be keeping a copy of the a recording so that you've got your Zoom audio. It might be getting a copy of the chat after your session. It might be doing a Zoom poll during the session. It might be recording. Maybe you'll use a Zoom form or Classroom. Maybe you'll use Seesaw or Padlet. But you want to have a number of different ways to be gathering that, and be gathering that through your session, but also keeping stuff afterwards to reflect on and figure out what you can do going forward. And a hint here would be, think of ways you can support your learners to self-regulate, whether that's like keeping a little checklist or having a flow chart, but just supporting them if this is the things you're meant to be doing, and these are the kind of steps and scaffolds that are going to get you there. This step's an important one because of Murphy's Law. Basically, you want to prepare. Audio problems, Wi-Fi, students not being able to access the info, these will happen. Everybody here, and I see a number of faces of very experienced teachers, is probably kind of nodding and thinking, absolutely, you know, it's not if, it's when. So if the students haven't got the audio, what other ways can you communicate? You know, the number of times I've spent on the Zoom bar explaining that there's a little bar like this, not often, but you know, it happens. You could communicate with them through the chat, through email, you could share a doc, or maybe you're connecting, bringing them up and talking. And I've done all of these on occasion over the few years that I've been working here at VLM Primary. You want to think if the Wi-Fi goes down, how else can you share the learning? Have you got some other activities that they can do? How can you get them to them? So tip is plan B and plan C. Now we're onto the strategies. So this is the real-time stuff. So you've planned, you've got that stuff as head in place, and now you're in your real-time lesson. And these are some things to think of while you're doing that. Have you got quick, regular feedback? That might be audio signals, you know, visual, your hand signals, yay, giving them smiles. Because you're on a screen and you're quite tiny, you need to sometimes be slightly larger than life and, you know, sort of to hold the interest and to connect and get that happening. Can you bring in some, you know, how can you vary it? How can you mix it up? Can you have some active energizers? You know, if you've got littlies, can you get them to move or find or share or show what's outside? So the real tip here is to keep it interactive. And this is kind of the key to everything else. And we're talking about lots and lots of different ways to do this. Love these questions coming through here. People asking if people are on Zoom or something else. Questions. This is your other interact thing. What specific questions will support your learning objectives? Now this cartoon here is showing if you ask too general a question, and it's a shout out to the people with real juniors. This is what happens if you know, some humorous teacher in the States has come up with this with her class of wee extroverts. So you want to have really specific questions going to help get the answers that you actually want to know for the learning. And you want to plan for structured conversations and hold them at the same time. You know, have you remembered to wait? Have you reflected whose voice is missing? And I will be sitting there beside me with a piece of paper, and I'll have the class as a kind of checklist, and I'll be checking off different bits and pieces. And I've heard other experienced colleagues online talking about this too. Some really good feedback in the chat here, thank you, which from Bronwyn saying that, you know, one of the difficulties, one of the challenges is that some of the time you have got the video off. So people have that off for bandwidth. And I've experienced this as well, you know, students with not such good Wi-Fi in particular situations. And it's something that you do have to work around. It's something back to your planning, you know, multiple channels and what you can do with that and working in. So then your audio becomes really important. If you're on Zoom, you've got the options like people did before to add little, you know, whether you're putting in the hands or the thumbs up on the Zoom, but just finding other avenues to communicate. I know some of my colleagues will say to students, okay, well, you've got your video off, but make sure you leave the audio on because I do want to be able to hear back from you. So thinking what's going to work for your situation. Which brings us very much to point 10. Which is the last one of these, which is reflecting and adapting. So what's best for your learners? All of these important considerations from some of our earlier next sessions about engagement is you're the person on the ground, you know your learners and your context. So you get to decide, you know, you get to decide what is going to work for your particular situation. And that's where hopefully some of the factors I see in here, a comment here that people can be shy and the breakout and overcoming shyness in breakout rooms. And if somebody's feeling a bit whakama or shy, I find that often it is quite helpful in a breakout room. I know some learners that are much more confident in that sort of, you know, smaller setting to do that, or sometimes they'll start off by doing in the chat. So I sometimes regard it as a bit of a progression. You know, you begin with this and you work up to that, especially if it's a class, they're getting to know each other. So what we've got coming up next is we've got a sandpit session. And what I would like you to do in this is you're going to get to choose what comes next via a Zoom poll. And these are some of the options. We could go into Zoom, managing participants. And for each of these, I've put a link to more sort of information from the companies about them.